Say
know
that again.
exactly what
Say
you're
that
doing.
again. Say that again.
Life really begins with the point that you realize you're never going to sort your life out. You're never going to get on top of everything. You're never going to sort of be in that kind of position of control. That I was pursuing this or that time management or productivity system or personal goal setting thing, really to keep my current life feeling provisional, right? Really to be able to say, like, okay, this is the dress rehearsal.
Hi, Oliver. Thank you for being here. I've got you in the spotlight. I'm going to read your bio. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate like being on the spotlight and sitting there while people read my bio.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and since I hate it, I do it to other people. So, I mean, if I have to go through it, and so I keep shortening my bio to where it just says, "This is Robert." You know, he wrote some shit. So here's Oliver's bio. All right, Oliver Burkeman is the New York Times and UK Sunday Times best-selling author of 4,000 Weeks and the newly released Meditation for Mortals. Um, 4 weeks to embrace your limitations and make time for what counts. His other books are The Antidote. And one of my coaches who helped me found Integration Nation, told me several months ago when I told him you're going to, in fact, I think even before I booked you to come on the call, he told me that one of his favorite books was The Antidote. Happiness for people who can't stand positive thinking and help, how to become slightly happier and get a bit more done. And if you knew that coach, it would be perfect that he would like a book, by this title. Um, for many years, I'm referring to Oliver, wrote a popular column for The Guardian. This column would change your life. In his email newsletter, The Imperfectionist, I love the title of that, by the way. He writes about productivity, mortality. I love talking about mortality, just death. I love talking about death. The power of limits and building a meaningful life in an age of distraction. After a decade in Brooklyn, it says he now lives in North York Moors in England, but he is indeed in Brooklyn for this call. Good to have you here, Oliver.
It's good to be here. Thank you for, yeah, no, I never like having my introduction paragraph read, but it's all true. So
Okay, we'll go
good
with
place to
it.
start. Yeah.
All right, well, let's just dive in. Let me, I know when I've mentioned your name to some people I've talked to that you're coming on the call, and I'm always really excited when I go, Oliver Bergman's coming on the call. And, some people I just get a blank look, like, I don't know who that is.
Of course.
And so tell us a little bit about you and maybe how you came to be a writer, journalist, a philosopher. Maybe just kind of just give us just a little personal short bio about you, so we get to know
Sure.
you as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's scandalous that there are still some people on the planet who don't know who I am, but we've got to set that right as quick as
You
possible,
know
right?
what?
Yeah.
I expect after we post this interview on YouTube, it will remedy that. We will just have such a breadth of reach. Everybody go, oh yeah, Oliver Berkman. Yeah.
No, it's a fact about the publishing industry that you can have, as I'm sure you have experienced, that you can have a for a book to do really well. It's not really something that has anything to do with the size of population because um, most people don't read books. It's the blunt
You
truth.
know that, huh? And if they do read them, they usually listen to them. So you're
Right.
right.
Oh
Most
well, yeah.
people don't read books.
So yeah, I'm Oliver. I should say, son of Stephen. That is a strange experience to say that. Maybe we'll get into that.
Cool.
He no, he's great. He's very much alive. He's not on this call. I trust. Um, I I was born in Liverpool in the northwest of England, but I grew up in York, a few hours away. The journalism part of my work has been like I wanted to be a journalist at a ridiculously young age. I think the sort of experience in the house where I grew up of the newspaper arriving on the breakfast table every day as the source of real authority in the world was a very made a big impression on me. Little did I know that about 3 years into my journalistic career, the internet and more would start to completely disrupt this authority. But it was there when I was a kid. So I was like foisting little photocopied amateur newspapers I'd made onto my classmates at probably elementary school, certainly like high school. Um, and I'll sort of fast forward, I guess, a bit. I went to university at Cambridge in England, the fancy old university that many people will have heard of, where I was spent a lot of time with people from a sort of much more slightly terrifying part of the British class structure than I had any familiarity with, aristocrats and the like. And then since then, I've pretty much done whatever I could to sort of stay in writing, to try and make money from writing. That was really always the thing that guided me. So that has meant being a news reporter. It's meant being a sort of researcher. It meant some very sort of insecure employment and some more sort of standard journalistic employment before I then went freelance and started focusing on books. But when I look back on it, the one sort of through line was that I wanted to write on a day-to-day basis. There's clearly something about that keeps me sane or making sense of the world. And yeah, the specific good fortune I had was to be able to sort of focus on the stuff that I was most interested in: psychology, philosophy, spirituality, all of this, through the lens of writing. It's a really good discipline if you have to write a 600-word column every week for years on this kind of stuff, because you get very swiftly over any risk of sort of sitting on the same article for a month until you think it's perfect. You don't have that luxury. So that was a very good discipline for me. And really everything I've done since has grown out of the way in which I was sort of using that column, I guess, to, if I'm really honest, I was using that column to explore topics and probably parts of myself that for anybody, maybe especially for a man, especially for a British man, I don't know, it would have been kind of embarrassing to think about or talk about or write about. But as long as it's like work, you've got this great alibi, right? I'm just doing a column on this thing, and I'm doing it with my tongue in my cheek, and it's, and I think it was a funny column.
He
But I was
doesn't really
getting
think or believe that stuff. He just,
right.
yeah.
But at the same time, I sort of went on a journey. I've said before, writing that column over a decade, I went on a journey from kind of cynicism towards sincerity, right? It was like, I think I set off to just mock the world of personal development. And by the end of it, I was like, there's plenty to mock in the world of personal development, but there's a lot more than that. And
Can we dive into that? You opened that door. I was going to ask you a question towards the end. I always have way too many questions. I'm always, as you might understand, way over prepared. It dawned on me this morning about 2 hours for the call. I thought I probably had enough last night, right? Enough. It just kind of applying your mentality as well. It's enough. It'll be okay. I can let go of it having even to be a perfect call. So here was a question I was going to save towards the end once I built some rapport with you. But so you said you started out mocking spirituality or mocking self-development, personal development. And, when I finished reading, I started reading 4,000 Weeks 2 or 3 months ago and got probably about 2/3 through it. Other things came up, took care of the president. And I finished reading it a few days ago. And one of my I love so many of the principles in it. So many really resonated. And I've taught some of them to this group of people since then. But one of the things, this was just my gut feel of it, that the things you were talking about, and especially the people you were talking to, almost seemed like, I can't think of a better term, elitist or first world issues written to elitist and first world people. You talk about living a meaningful life. You talk about, community activism and politics and the climate and thing. And I thought, yeah, I don't even actually know anybody that gets involved in those kinds of things. And I think I'm a left-leaning liberal. I'm educated.
Right.
And I thought, this seems almost, even talking about self-development, and I write books about, almost seems like an elitist way of viewing the world. And it only really applies to a narrow band of people. And so do you see the things you're talking about, the philosophy, the psychology? How does this apply to people who've never heard of or will read of James Hillman or James Clear or Pema Chodron or, Michael Singer, or how does the work you've been doing, because I love that you said you started out cynical and then kind of became sincere. How does what you are trying to do, the message you're trying to relay, apply to people who aren't already in that camp of self-development, feeling overwhelmed by pressure, having to be better, be good, be productive, get more done, make more of an impact, all of that stuff? What about the person that just gets up, goes to a blue-collar job, clocks in, clocks out, goes home, has a few brews, watches the ball game on TV, go to bed and get up and do it again? Does the message you're trying to convey apply to that kind of
Yeah,
person?
it's such a great question. It's something I love sort of thinking through and talking about. So, I mean, let's put aside for a moment, very happy to come to it, but let's put aside like the left-right side of this for a minute, because that's complicated and interesting. And
Oh, always, always.
but just in terms of the yeah, elite versus blue collar, knowledge worker versus other kinds of worker kind of thing. So firstly, there's a challenge when you're writing anything like this in what you hope is going to be a popular form. You've got to pick your examples, right? You've got to pick your case studies and your stories that you tell. And there I'm fairly sort of unashamed in addressing people who I think are basically like me, who the specific nature of their struggles is to do with too many emails in the inbox, feeling like they ought to be doing things to help certain different big problems in the world, trying to be good parents and consuming probably plenty of advice on social media and elsewhere about how they're supposed to do that, and all the rest of it. So that is very much the sort of first world problem, professional managerial class problem, layer of it. But I do think that the underlying issues about sort of confronting our own limitations, how much energy we put into avoiding the experience of being limited, finite humans, and how that leads us away from leading the most sort of meaningful and fulfilling lives. I do think that that is essentially a universal principle. Now, the sort of the blue collar person you imagine there, I mean, if that person feels no sense of dissatisfaction with the day to day of their lives, then it's not for me to try to make them dissatisfied, and that could apply to somebody at any sort of socioeconomic level.
You're not going to try to inject them with an existential angst that they don't already
Right,
have,
right.
and
However,
not
yeah,
even
yeah,
use the word existential
right,
angst because
right,
okay.
right. Yeah, exactly. However, I don't think that not necessarily having the language that I have or the literary references that I have means that that person doesn't experience what I would think of as sort of philosophical problems in their life. What are we here for? What am I doing? Could life feel more alive than this? Maybe some people will never even articulate it in those terms, but I think that's kind of rather more universal. And so, maybe a larger proportion of such people will never read my books, fine. But I think the issues that we're talking about here, they are almost by definition apply to all of us. One of the critiques that comes up sometimes is someone will say to me, well, it's easy for you to say, right? If you've got 10,000 emails, you're in a position where you could just neglect half of them for maybe you'll just delete half of them because nothing too terrible is going to happen.
Does that feel like a
Right.
gift? Oh yeah. Oh sure, I can ignore them all, but I still know they're there, right? I know they haven't
Well,
been
first
answered.
year, right, and then but it is true that I'm writing from a position where if I spend a week or two being pretty lame at doing email, I'm unlikely to be sort of I'm not going to be fired. I'm not going to end up without a roof over my head just because of that. And my response to that kind of "it's easy for you to say" thing is always to say, well, yeah, I think it is easy for me to say. I think some of these lessons that we're talking about here and about confronting limitation are made a lot harder if you're in more economically precarious situation. But they're still true, right? Something can be easy for me to say and still true. And the idea that to find the most meaningful and vibrant and peaceful and accomplished lives, we need to sort of go through some process of confronting and acknowledging or metabolizing even our limitations, our limited time, our limited control, all the rest of that. I think that applies to us all. Maybe to some people it comes naturally. Maybe to some people it never really arises as a serious issue. But I think it's a way of talking about the kind of dissatisfaction that people can have in any position in society and any level
Yeah.
of privilege.
Yeah, no, I like that, and maybe without us going too far down this particular rabbit hole, I'm listening to you thinking, I'll mention somebody that probably most of us have heard of it, but Maslow. It seems
Mm.
like we got to get up to a certain degree on that hierarchy of needs, where we're getting a certain degree being met, where we even have the time or energy to think about limitations or finite
Right.
things. So it does seem like there is a certain degree we've got to get to before we even crosses our mind that
I
there's.
think, yeah, I think that's really a good point. There's a flip side to it, which is that a certain degree of doing well and having our material lives sort of roughly in order can actually be an impediment. I'm not suggesting, giving
It
away all your
can.
money uh, and taking to the streets if you don't have to, but there is that sense that, well, most obviously, the more control you sort of feel like you're exerting over life, the more it can become to feel like if you just had a bit more control, if you just had a bit more resources of money or time or whatever, then finally happiness and meaning would would arise. In the book I wrote before these, in the antidote, I spent some time in some of the slums outside Nairobi in Kenya, which have this kind of very interesting finding. I mean, really, really people living in abject conditions, but in sort of global mental health surveys, which are not a brilliant instrument for understanding happiness, but anyway, they seem to come out quite well, right? People, there does not
Mm.
seem to be sort of epic levels of depression and anxiety in such a setting as you would expect. Meanwhile, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, everybody's really depressed and anxious, right? While earning many millions, and this is sort of problematic territory because it leads to certain sort of, well, sometimes people want to say that just like, oh, to be abjectly poor is the perfect situation of happiness, and I don't believe that at all.
Mm.
What I do think, and what I concluded in that section of that reporting, was that when you have no hope of reaching a certain level of financial security or public acclaim or various other things that we cherish a lot in the developed world, there is a sense in which it just sort of throws you back onto the present moment and you say to yourself, if there is going to be joy in my life, it's going to have to be found now, right? Postponing it
Yeah.
indefinitely not make sense. And I think it's much easier for people in my position, say, many people on this call, I'm guessing, of course, I don't know you all, um, to fall for that trap, right? Of saying, like, well, just the next level of this or that, money, uh, house, but even psychological development, right? It can be something like that, where you're saying, well,
Hmm.
when I get to the next level of it, that's when I get to really sort of dive into life. And if you're in a much more insecure situation, there can at least be the sense that, like, it better be now if it's ever going to be.
Well, let me ask the guys on the call. Let's do another poll in the chat. If you a term that Oliver uses is one-dayism. I came across that in one of your emails, just reading. I love that. How many of you out there live with that kind of one-dayism? As soon as I get this done, then. As soon as I accomplish this, then. As soon as I get this problem solved, then. As soon as I get a wife, a woman, as soon as I get rid of the woman I got, then. Put a one in the chat if you live with that. I got to get this done,
Me
accomplish
too, by the way.
this. Yeah, figure this out. Yeah, me, of course, me too. Then I can live. Then I can be happy. Then I'll have a sense of control. Then I'll have enough money in the bank. Then I can just fucking goof off. I love that I've heard you say many times that, used to be the whole goal of being rich was so you didn't have to work. So you could just,
Right.
live a life of leisure. But, now people have plenty of money. I'm not done. I got it. Because, as soon as I get there, then I can
Mm.
do it. And, culturally, I live in Mexico. My wife's Mexican. I met her here about 10 years ago. But I grew up in Seattle, Washington. But, very white bread, Boeing engineer family, community.
Mm.
Yeah. And I remember when I first discovered Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, about 25, 26 years ago, I was just captured by it. People often said, Robert, why'd you move to Mexico? Why'd you move to Puerto Vallarta? Did you look at other places? I go, no, I loved it here. I just kept coming back and coming back. And I know I was drawn to those cultural things you're talking about. It is a historically poor country. Well,
Mhm,
historically very class. You got some
mhm,
really rich people of
mhm,
European, Spanish descent who run the country and control the wealth, and all the local indigenous native that, don't. And who,
mhm.
were uneducated, oppressed by the Catholic Church, big families, living in poverty, all of that stuff. But I tell you what, I'd come down here and I would be happy. Maybe it's the sun, maybe it's the margaritas, maybe it's the beach. I don't know. I'd be happy. I'd go back to Seattle, gray, gloomy. It's like, like London, UK.
Mhm.
I'd be depressed. Everybody's in their car. Nobody smiles. Nobody talks. And what I'd hear people say, and I'd say, these Mexicans, they could be as poor as dirt and they're happy. And,
Mhm.
and and I tease my wife. She grew up in poverty in Guadalajara, Mexico. 8 out of 10 kids, alcoholic father, abandoned the family. She learned to be tough as a kid. But I teased her. I said Mexicans love free stuff. They know how to exploit free stuff. So whether it's noise, music, dancing, gossip, talking, fighting, fucking, and beer. Now, the beer's not free, but it's almost free. You just combine beer with all those things: fireworks, guns shooting, loud music, gossip, fighting with each other, fucking when it's all said and done. And you've had a great night. And it's all mostly free. You don't have to have money to enjoy those things. And I think there is this value in learning to just enjoy what you've got in the moment and celebrate it. And I think we all probably understand, and you're right about it, the more accomplished we get, the more we get, the more we think we got to keep getting more, and until we can be happy or have a meaningful life, or as you even talk about, just goof off, just do whatever it is you
Yeah,
want to do because you want to do it.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a sort of a subtle point, right? Because I, to me, it's almost separate from the question of like, should one be pursuing money in life, right? It's not even to do with what content you put in that 1 day box. It's very easy. There's a very sort of cultural cliche to sort of disdain people who just want more money, and then to kind of celebrate people who want more personal growth or who want to become better people in some other way, or want to become more disciplined or want to become physically healthier. And really, the point I'm trying to pinpoint, and
Mhm.
you brought it out in in what you said, but it's the it's the futureness of that issue that is the problem, not
I love that
necessarily.
term. I love that.
I happen to also believe that a life completely fixated on nothing but accumulating money is not going to make you happy, but it's kind of a separate point. Certainly it would be possible, and there are people who can just love the experience of being in business that happens to make them rich,
Yeah,
but they are engaging in it as an expression of
right.
of enjoyment and being alive. What a lot of us are doing, I think, and I'm sure there's some people on this call will resonate with this because a lot of people do, is we are what has been called the phrase in psychology is insecure overachievers, right? People who actually do a lot of stuff, get a lot of stuff done,
Yeah, I
enjoy
often
good.
say we live in a culture where we worship at the altar of Navy SEALs. These
Right,
overachieving people, the
right,
David Goggins, the Alex
right.
Hormozis. Yeah, yeah, that's my role model. That's what those people.
Yeah. And what we're doing on some level when we do that is we're trying to sort of plug a plug a void or fill a plug a deficit, fill a void, right? There's
Or
something
deal with a demon or a dragon
right,
that's
right,
on
exactly.
our
There's
tail.
something
Yeah.
that's not right that needs fixing by our getting to that future point. And as I write in the most recent book, one of the biggest sort of realizations for me has been understanding that actually there's a sense in which life begins at the point you realize you're never going to sort your life out. You're never going to get on top of everything. You're never going to
Say
know
that again.
exactly what you're
Say that
doing.
again. Say that again.
Life really begins at the point that you realize you're never going to sort your life out. You're never going to get on top of everything. You're never going to sort of be in that kind of position of control. You can be in a position of real agency and influence and power, but not control in the way that I use that word anyway.
I love this. So I'm I'll be 70 at the end of this year. And I've got a nutrition coach and I try to take care of myself. And she nags me about getting to the gym more often and says, you're a role model and you need to, and you need to take good care of yourself so you can do this for a long time. And I agree with her. She's right about all that stuff. But I'm listening to you and just kind of looking at this because like you say, it doesn't matter. Are we pursuing more money? Are we pursuing fitness? Are we pursuing personal development and evolution of self? Do are any of those things, are we going to ever get there? Are any of those things ever going to really fulfill us, satisfy us if we're coming from a place of lack or not enough? Because I could get in great
Yeah.
shape, but I could still probably look in the mirror and find some flaw and think, well, I still don't have six pack abs, even after all the work I've put into it. And if that's the thing, if I think, well, I have to have six pack abs to feel enough, enoughness, that's never going to work. And so there's never enough money, never enough lean body mass,
Yeah.
never enough personal development if it's coming from a place of not okay right now.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. And I found this again and again in different domains of my life, right? It's like certain kinds of, if you're pursuing the future in that way, it never works. Once you can sort of shift into a place where you are expressing yourself in the present, you can actually make a lot of great gains in all sorts of domains, right? It's actually a far better way to make progress, productivity, creativity, fitness, all the rest of it. But there's obviously the big question that arises there is like, so how do you make that shift?
Well, yeah,
And
that
yeah,
question was kind of coming up, going to be next. And I tell guys as well, I don't know of anybody that's ever made true change by hating on something.
right.
And I want to, let's hold on to that question for a moment. And I want to go back to the quote that you sent me. I always ask our guests to present a quote. And I noticed some people put in the chat box, well, the quote was showing at the beginning of the call that they really liked it. Um, the mantra that we have for our program is good men doing better.
Mm,
And I have a wristband that just says do better as part of Integration Nation. And I found that people have a really hard time with trying to figure out what's the difference between being better and doing better. And I say it's actually easier to do better if you
mm,
already feel okay about who you are.
yeah.
If you're not feeling okay about who you are, the do better actually becomes difficult and
Mm,
problematic and tiresome and troubling and we just beat ourselves up more because we haven't gotten there. And that quote, I'm going to ask you why you picked that particular quote because it's a subtle quote, but it really resonates where you says it is easier to try. I think try is the key word in there to be better than you are than to be who you are. So tell us pull that apart for us, that quote. Why do you like it? What does it mean? What does it mean to
yeah.
you?
Yeah. I was going to say that it probably is susceptible to a number of interpretations, but for me, um, this is pointing to how easy it is to pursue self-improvement and what feels like self-transformation as a kind of avoidance.
Mm,
Um, so that it's something sort of easy in a negative sense about just trying to become better, trying to optimize more, trying to be stronger, trying to be more disciplined, trying to, partly because it again, as we've been talking about, it places the moment of truth in the future. So it's like, hey, right now I've got a terrible problem with the procrastination or with not with my dating life or whatever it is,
or
but
belly fat.
I'm working on it. And I've got to fix it. I've got to fix this thing with myself. But when I do fix it, then everything's going to be great. And I think that a lot of the time that functions for us as a sort of excuse to not quite fully show up for life here and now. And I think Marion Woodman is what I take her to be saying in that quote anyway, is that actually really more forthrightly being who you are is difficult, and sometimes it involves declining to change in certain ways, and sometimes it involves changing in ways that don't feel like the ones that you want, because what you want is just to get, say, more and more optimized and efficient so you can handle all the demands. whereas maybe being who you are is going to involve saying no to some of the demands. That's a sort of that's
Sure.
an easy example of the case. And I just think that, yeah, time and again, I have found that I can see, looking at myself in the past, that I was pursuing this or that uh, time management or productivity system or personal goal setting thing, really to keep my current life feeling provisional, right? Really to be able to say, like, okay, this is the dress rehearsal. It's going to be later that I do the thing. And that will stop you, you know, asking the person out, writing the first 100 words of the novel, trying out the sport, traveling to the country, because you'll always be telling yourself, like, I'm saving my, what's the idiom I'm looking for? I'm storing up my fuel or my ammunition for for the for the later part of life.
Okay, well, so let's talk about what we do different, which I know is what you write books and columns about. Um, so if we were to, I'll back up a little bit. When I talk with men about the concept of non-attachment, about how, paraphrasing Buddha, that attachment is the cause of all suffering. Getting emotionally attached to a specific thing is what causes us to suffer. Well, I'm attached to wanting this woman to love me or have sex with me, or I'm attached to my book being a bestseller, or I'm attached to, never being embarrassed or looking foolish. And then, we're going to suffer.
Mhm.
And when I talk with men about becoming outcome agnostic or equally okay with every possible outcome, now that's challenging. It's human
Mhm.
nature to want what we want.
Mhm.
And guys will often they'll actually get angry at me and kind of pissed off at me. Like I made this thing up that I'm imposing on them. They go, why would I even like get out of bed in the morning if I had no attachment to outcome? Why would I even talk to a woman if I had no attachment to outcome? And I go, well, it is human nature to have attachment. But when I try to tell them that the actual letting go of emotionalized attachments to very specific outcomes and learning to love what is, be in the moment with what is, embrace everything as a gift, an opportunity, that actually so many more doors actually open up.
Mhm.
So many more actions become easier to take. There's so many more adventures that are way outside anything we could have planned in our own finite minds to think up what would be something cool. And life
Mhm.
just becomes interesting. And I
Yeah.
become more productive when
Yeah.
I'm not attached to specific outcomes. And like if I have my calendar more free and open, I get more done. You'd think if I have a lot of stuff on my to-do list and on my calendar, I'd be more productive. I'm more
Yeah.
productive if I have wide open spaces and the muse just takes a hold of me and goes, I got to sit and write this right now. I can't get
Yeah.
up from my chair until I'm done writing this. There's no agenda other than it just needs to be written by me. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so how do we help people make that shift from thinking the goal setting, the seeking external validation, the one-dayism, well, when I get there, then, if, when, then, covert contracts, if I do this now, I'll be happy in the future. How do we make that shift? And again, I know you write books and columns about it, but can you give us a formula maybe that
Yeah.
worked for you?
Well, I mean, let me say, I want to say one thing first of all about the framing of this that I think is exactly pointed to in what you were saying, and then yeah, I'll try to say a little bit on a very practical level. I think we have been poorly served in the way that sort of spirituality culture, self-help culture presents a lot of these things. I think it's very easy to sort of look at the sections in a bookstore or whatever, and see basically two things. One which says pursue your goals with relentless attachment, and
Mhm.
just be rigidly self-disciplined about achieving the specific things you want to get to. And then the other in the spirituality section, um, that uh, that basically implies that if you could let go of all that, the way to be happy is to let go of all that and just be sort of just kind of float around in the world and be passive and maybe go to a few yoga retreats, but basically kind of not be an agent in the same way anymore. And so, if we want to get Jungian, or maybe this is relevant to your framing of things as well, there's something sort of stereotypically masculine about the first of those, and something stereotypically feminine about the second.
Yeah.
I really want, and it's my sort of life project in myself as much, and it's expressed in my books, I guess, to find some synthesis of these, or to find a place you go to when you transcend them both, and to say that, you know, you can enter a place of not being anxious and deficit based and rigidly fixated on your goals, exactly as you say, not trading it for a sort of passive floaty life, but trading it for a different kind, a much more fulfilling kind of accomplishment. So the way I think about this, just in case this resonates with anybody, is like, yeah, I try very much not to attach to individual specific outcomes, but not because I think everything's just kind of fine and I can just hang out and be here now and that's it, but because the thing that I'm really committed to, the deepest level, is a sort of ongoing, endless unfolding of aliveness and getting more liberated and getting more empowered and feeling more pleasure and feeling more, just feeling more alive and vibrant. That is, that's not goal focused in the sense of I will get to this specific outcome in 60 days from now, but it's very much a teleology, right? It's not just static, it's going somewhere. It's on the move, it's dynamic. It's like I am trying to get better. I do want to be constantly, in some sense, improving or becoming more, or becoming who I am, as the Jungians would say. And I really like that way of thinking about it, right? Don't attach to specific goals, but not because you just have to kind of do nothing. It's because precisely so that you can enter this big flow of this dynamic flow of, of accomplishment. And that's another way of talking about what you're what you're saying, I think, when you talk about, being more productive and more open to serendipitous opportunities to do important
Yeah.
things in that
Adventure.
mode. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
It's 2:45 in the afternoon where you are.
Hmm.
What have you done today to live that paradigm that you just shared with us?
Great question. Um, it hasn't felt like a particularly great example of it today. I'm going to be honest. My There's been a lot of sort of changes of plan here on this trip involving uh, logistics, childcare, doctor's appointments, all manner of things. Nothing very serious, but just enough to sort of
Time management
right.
issues, life
But it is
happening.
right. So it affected me in this sense, right? Which is in a good way, which is that I feel like life constantly reminds me not to be too rigidly attached to any particular sort of planning or scheduling uh, methodology. Again, not to just be aimless, but to have a very, very loose grip on to have kind of quite clear plans, and then to grip for clear plans loosely held, or whatever the phrase you come across is, right? I think that's a very powerful way of thinking about it. So, today, for example, I didn't get to have the morning unfold in the way that I like mornings to unfold, with my like writing in my journal. I didn't get to
You
start
didn't
work.
do your morning
I
pages?
didn't.
Oh no, how could you
Oh,
have a
exactly. And
I
and
didn't
I
I didn't
actually
either. I'd take my wife to the
I,
airport this morning and I didn't do morning pages either.
I struggle with, right? I struggle with the idea that, yeah, I struggle with the idea that, oh, it's like 11 a.m. now, and maybe I've got 45 minutes that I could do them. Does that, and actually, of course, it's fine, right? Because otherwise I'm putting the schedule ahead of um, the thing that really matters. So I have certainly been challenged on that today, but in seeking, again, seeking to sort of remember what are the things I'd like to accomplish today? What are the things that make me feel most alive when I make time for them? Where can I meet reality? So I still want to do the things I want to do, but but it never works, and it certainly doesn't work in family life if I say like I guarantee I've got to do this at 6:15 a.m. every single day, right?
But isn't
That's
isn't that liberating to acknowledge it never works? It never
yeah, no, and,
works.
and actually really, and I think that just to your point before about how do you go through this transition, how do you do it? I really don't want to spend much of this call giving a sales pitch because that's obnoxious, but I think it is. But to be honest, I've got to say that in my most recent book, Meditations for Mortals, which is not really a book about meditation, by the way, as I'm having to tell everybody now when I go and talk about it, but that was my fault. The that the structure of that book is specifically my sort of best attempt to answer that question of how you go about this change. I grew very exasperated with two kinds of self-help book, right? One is the kind that just gives you a big program you've got to follow. And so you say to yourself, well, this is great, but I'm a bit busy now, so I'm going to put this off for another 6 months and I'll put it into practice later. And then the other is the kind that I think maybe in some ways my other books have been, where you bring about a perspective shift. And that's much more powerful in the long run, I think. But they fade as well, right? How do you keep a perspective shift going is the real question. So Meditations for Mortals, just very quickly, I talk about this. It's divided up into 28 very short chapters, structured over 4 weeks. And the idea is that you might read roughly, again, I'm not trying to be a control freak about it. That's sort of close to the essence of what I'm saying, but you might read one of those a day, and no more than one of those a day, ideally. And what these are little perspective shifts that take you through different phases of action and of sort of planning and executing action in the world. And actually, I'm sure I've only done it imperfectly, but my goal there is to kind of combine the practical steps with the perspective shift, because I think that's the only way change has ever happened for me, is like repeatedly exposing myself to a different way of being, sort of hanging out in that way of being, which things like coming onto your regular calls here, okay, is a classic example of it. Not just that you're going to get one piece of information from one of these conversations and run with it. It's the marinating in the perspective that is a big empowering part of it. And at the same time, then you want, like, okay, some suggestions for how you execute that on the level of planning the day or structuring a to-do list. And I've got those as well, but they're very much downstream of this shift back into the sometimes uncomfortable reality of the present moment, where you're going to have to take tough decisions with your time, and you're definitely going to feel like the products that you put into the world are imperfect, and you're never going to feel completely ready for a new project, and you're always going to be a bit baffled by even the people closest to you, perhaps especially the people closest to you. And to sort of feel your way into that rather mucky but true reality, and then take a step forward on something that matters to you, instead of, yes, telling yourself you're going to get rid of all that junk first, and then in some pristine future do all the things you've been waiting to do.
I love it. And thank you for plugging the book. I'm going to do a chapter a morning. That's my commitment. And then I'll see if I could, if sometimes I have to let go of that commitment, if that serves me as well.